Thomas Reeves held the cardboard sign with trembling fingers while his wife, Ellen, tried not to cry. The words blurred in the winter wind. Belgian Malinois, $100. Must have warm home. Between them, Sentry sat perfectly still, her amber eyes watching every person who passed without stopping. They weren't selling their dog because they wanted to. They were selling her because their pension had disappeared 3 months ago, and choosing between feeding a dog and heating their home wasn't really a choice at all. Then a man in work boots stopped, and everything changed. Before we begin, please subscribe to our channel and stay with us until the end of this story. Comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. The cold didn't care about dignity. It pressed against Thomas Reeves' chest like a fist that wouldn't unclench, made his fingers ache around the cardboard sign, turned each breath into something he had to think about. 76 years of Montana winters, and this one felt different. Meaner. More personal. "How much longer?" Ellen whispered beside him. Her voice was thin, stretched tight over worry she refused to name out loud. "Until someone asks the right questions," Thomas said. They'd been standing at the edge of Riverside's farmers market for 2 hours. The Saturday morning crowd flowed past like water around stones, present but untouching. A young mother glanced at the sign, shook her head, kept walking. 2 teenagers laughed at something on a phone screen, never looked up. An older man slowed, read the words Belgian Malinois, then saw $100, and moved on as if the price itself were an insult. Sentry didn't beg. She sat between Thomas and Ellen with military precision, spine straight, ears alert. Her black and tan coat was clean despite everything. Ellen had brushed her that morning with hands that shook from more than cold. The dog's amber eyes tracked movement without judgment, cataloging threats, measuring distances. She'd positioned herself so the wind hit her flank first, creating a small barrier of warmth for Ellen's legs. "Good girl," Ellen murmured, reaching down to touch Sentry's head. The dog leaned into the contact for exactly 3 seconds, then returned to scanning the market. Always watching, always ready. A man in an expensive parka stopped. He looked at the sign, looked at Sentry, then laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that cut through the market noise. $100 for a dog that old?" He directed the question at Thomas, but didn't wait for an answer. "I'll give you 20, cash, right now." Thomas felt Ellen stiffen beside him. He kept his voice level, the way he'd learned in Korea when officers tested you with stupid orders. "She's 6 years old. That's not old for her breed." "And she comes with rules?" The man pointed at the smaller text below the price. "References required? Home inspection? Weekly photo updates?" He laughed again. "You're not selling a dog. You're conducting a job interview." "That's exactly right," Ellen said. Her schoolteacher voice emerged, the one that had controlled classrooms for 30 years. "We're interviewing potential families. If that's a problem, keep walking." The man's smile curdled. "Your loss, literally." He walked away, already pulling out his phone to tell someone about the crazy old people who thought their mutt was worth more than convenience. Thomas watched him go and felt something crack inside his chest. Not his heart. That was still beating, still trying. It was something else. The belief, maybe, that people would see past the price to the promise. That someone would understand they weren't selling Sentry. They were entrusting her. "We could lower it," Ellen said quietly. $50, just to get her somewhere warm." "No." Thomas coughed, turned his head so she wouldn't see how much it hurt. "The price keeps out people who think she's disposable." Ellen nodded, but her eyes were wet. They both knew the truth neither would speak. If no one took Sentry today, there might not be another market day. The propane company had called yesterday. Payment in full or disconnection. They had 4 days. Sentry shifted. The movement was subtle, a quarter turn that put her shoulder against Thomas's knee, not seeking comfort, offering it. The dog knew. She always knew. Time moved strangely in the cold. Minutes felt like hours. An actual hour disappeared in what seemed like seconds. More people passed. A few stopped to read. Fewer asked questions. None made offers. The sun climbed higher without bringing warmth, just harder light that made the snow glitter like broken glass. Thomas was about to suggest they pack up when he felt it. A change in the air, a shift in Sentry's attention. The dog's ears came forward, her breathing slowed. Not alarm, recognition. A man approached from the left, walking with purpose but without hurry. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe early 40s. He wore work boots that had seen actual work, scuffed, salt-stained, the leather creased at the flex points. His jacket was canvas, insulated, but not new. Dark hair cut military short, face clean-shaven, eyes that swept the market in a pattern Thomas recognized from his own service days. The man stopped 6 feet away, close enough to read the sign clearly, far enough to respect their space. His gaze moved from the cardboard to Sentry to Thomas and Ellen, taking in details without staring. Sentry stood. She didn't pull toward him or shy away. She simply rose to her feet and watched him with an intensity that made Thomas's pulse quicken. "Your dog's scanning for threats," the man said. His voice was low, controlled. "That's trained behavior." Thomas nodded slowly. She washed out of the canine program, too protective of handlers, not aggressive enough toward targets. So she chooses people over protocol. The man's mouth almost smiled. "That's not a flaw." "Tell that to the military," Ellen said. "I did. They didn't listen." Now he did smile, brief and genuine. "I'm Marcus Wade. I read your sign. All of it. The small print, too." "Most people skip that part," Thomas said. "Most people aren't serious." Marcus knelt slowly, not reaching for Sentry, just lowering himself to her level. The dog's tail moved once. Not a wag, more like a question mark. "Hey there. What's your name?" "Sentry," Ellen said. "She earned it." Marcus stayed crouched, letting Sentry make the choice. The dog stepped forward, extended her neck, scented his jacket sleeve. Her nostrils flared, processing information. Whatever she found there satisfied something because she sat again, this time angled slightly toward Marcus instead of away. "She smells gun oil," Marcus said, "and sawdust, maybe diesel. I work night shift at the lumber mill." Thomas studied this man who announced his job like it explained him. The military bearing, the careful movements, the way he'd read every word of their conditions without complaint. These details assembled into a picture that didn't quite match lumber mill night shift. "What did you do before the mill?" Thomas asked. Marcus stood, knees making a sound that said injuries healed but remembered. "I was a Navy SEAL. 15 years. Got out 5 years ago." Ellen's hand found Thomas's arm, squeezed gently. They knew what that meant, what it cost, what it left behind. "And now you cut lumber," Thomas said, not quite a question. "And now I cut lumber." Marcus met his eyes without flinching. "Night shift. It's what I need right now." There was a story there, something heavy that lived in the space between seal and sawdust. Thomas recognized the weight. He'd carried his own version home from Korea, spent decades figuring out where to set it down. "The conditions aren't negotiable," Ellen said, pulling a folded paper from her coat pocket. "We need references. We need to see where she'll live. We need weekly photos proving she's healthy and safe, and if we have any concern at all, we visit unannounced." Marcus took the paper, read it carefully. "That's fair. More than fair." "Most people call it crazy," Thomas said. "Most people don't understand what you're actually selling." Marcus folded the paper, tucked it in his jacket pocket. "You're not selling a dog. You're making sure her next chapter is better than your current one." Ellen made a soft sound, almost a sob swallowed before it could form. Thomas felt his own throat tighten. This stranger had seen them, really seen them, in a way the whole morning's crowd had not. "I can't take her today," Marcus said. "I need to prep my place. Make sure the heat's steady, stock up on food, get a vet appointment scheduled." He paused. "But I'd like to come by tomorrow. See your home, let you see mine. Make sure this is right for all of us." "You're asking to inspect us?" Thomas almost laughed. "I'm asking for permission to care enough to do this properly." Marcus looked at Sentry again. "She deserves that. So do you." Before either of them could respond, a new voice cut through the market noise. "Well, isn't this touching?" The man who approached was everything Marcus wasn't. Polished where Marcus was practical. Smooth where Marcus was straightforward. Mid-50s, expensive wool coat, hair silver at the temples in a way that looked deliberate. His shoes were leather, spotless despite the snow and slush. He carried a leather portfolio like a shield. Sentry's reaction was immediate and visceral. She moved between this man and Ellen, a low sound building in her chest that wasn't quite a growl, but held all its promise. "Easy," Thomas said, but the dog didn't relax. The man stopped, holding up one hand in theatrical surrender. "Apologies, didn't mean to startle anyone. Preston Vale, Senior Financial Solutions." He produced a business card, offered it to Thomas. "I couldn't help but overhear. You're selling your dog?" "That's none of your concern," Ellen said. Actually, it might be. Preston's smile was practiced, reassuring in the way insurance commercials were reassuring, too smooth to trust. "I work with fixed-income seniors navigating financial transitions. If you're in a position where you need to sell a beloved pet, I'm guessing there are underlying issues I might help resolve." Marcus shifted his weight slightly, and Thomas noticed the change, from casual observer to something more alert, more ready. "We're managing fine," Thomas said, but the lie sat heavy in the cold air. Preston's eyes flicked to the sign, to their worn coats, to the way Ellen held herself against the wind. He was reading them too, but not with Marcus's concern, with calculation. "Of course you are, but management and thriving, those are different things." Preston pulled a folder from his portfolio. "I've helped dozens of Riverside seniors optimize their benefits, consolidate their bills, ensure their pensions work for them instead of against them. Free consultation, no pressure." "We're not interested," Ellen said. "Just information, in case circumstances change." Preston set a business card on the crate beside their sign. "My office is on Main Street, right above the pharmacy. Stop by any time. Or I'm happy to come to you. Initial home assessments are complimentary." Sentry's growl deepened. The sound was so low it was more vibration than noise, but everyone heard it. Preston took a step back, his smile tightening. "Someone should train that dog. Aggression is a liability." "She's not aggressive," Marcus said. His voice hadn't changed volume, but something in it made Preston pause. "She's reading intent. Big difference." The two men looked at each other for a long moment. Preston broke first, his smile returning but not reaching his eyes. "Of course. Well, the offer stands. Thomas, Ellen, Think about it. Sometimes pride costs more than it's worth. He nodded, turned, walked away with the confidence of someone who always got a second chance to make his pitch. Thomas picked up the business card, studied it. Embossed lettering, professional design. It looked legitimate, respectable, safe. "Throw it away," Marcus said quietly. "You know him?" "No, but I know the type." Marcus watched Preston disappear into the market crowd. He showed up the second he smelled vulnerability. That's not help. That's hunting. Ellen shivered, and this time it wasn't from cold. "He knew our names. We didn't introduce ourselves." Thomas felt ice settle in his stomach. She was right. Preston had called them by name before anyone offered it. "He's been watching you," Marcus said. "Probably has been for a while. These guys don't work markets randomly. They research. They target." "How do you know this?" Ellen asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Because I spent 15 years learning how predators operate. The uniform changes, the tactics adapt, but the pattern's always the same. They find people in crisis and offer solutions that cost more than they cure." Thomas looked at the business card again, then at Marcus. Two strangers, both offering help. One felt wrong, the other felt necessary. "Come by tomorrow," Thomas said. 1 o'clock. We'll show you our place, you show us yours. We'll decide together if this works." Marcus nodded. 1 o'clock. I'll be there." He reached out slowly, let Sentry sniff his hand again. This time she licked his knuckles once, then returned to her position between Thomas and Ellen. "See you tomorrow, Sentry." After Marcus left, they stayed another hour. 2 more people stopped. One offered $40, no questions. Another wanted to know if Sentry was good with chickens. They needed a farm dog, something expendable if coyotes came. Thomas said no to both. When they finally packed up, Ellen's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't fold the sign. "Let me," Thomas said. But his weren't much better. They walked home slowly, Sentry between them, their breath visible in the failing light. The house appeared at the end of their street, small, old, familiar. Windows dark because they'd turned off lights they couldn't afford to power. The porch sagged on one side, where wood had rotted, and they'd had no money to replace it. Inside was colder than outside felt. They'd kept the heat at 55 degrees, low enough to prevent pipes freezing, high enough to survive if you wore enough layers. Ellen went straight to the kitchen, put water on for tea using the gas stove because it was cheaper than the electric kettle. Thomas sank into his chair, the one that knew the shape of him after 40 years. Sentry lay at his feet, chin on his boot. He reached down, ran his fingers through her fur. "I'm sorry, girl," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Sentry's tail thumped twice against the floor. Forgiveness without judgment. Ellen brought tea in mismatched mugs, sat in her own chair across from him. They drank in silence, the warmth spreading through their fingers more precious than the taste. "What do you think?" Ellen finally asked. "About Marcus or Preston?" "Both." Thomas set down his mug. "Marcus feels like someone who understands cost. Preston feels like someone who charges it." "Should we call Jordan?" Ellen asked. Their daughter's name sat heavy between them. They hadn't called her when the pension stopped, hadn't called when the bills multiplied, hadn't called because Ellen had already burdened her enough when her father died last year, and Thomas's pride wouldn't bend far enough to ask his child to save him. "Not yet," Thomas said. "Let's see what tomorrow brings." That night, Thomas dreamed of Korea. The cold there had been different, sharper, meaner, seasoned with fear. He woke at 3 a.m., coughing hard enough to taste copper. Ellen's hand found his back in the darkness, rubbing circles until his lungs remembered how to work properly. "It's getting worse," she whispered. "It's fine." "Thomas." "I said it's fine." He softened his voice. "We just need to get through winter." Except winter had months left, and their propane had days. Morning came with the kind of pale sunlight that promised nothing. Marcus arrived at exactly 1 o'clock, driving a truck that was old but maintained, the kind of vehicle that started every time because someone cared enough to keep it running. He brought documentation, rental agreement showing his address, pay stubs from the lumber mill, contact information for his landlord and his shift supervisor. He brought vaccination records for himself, proof he'd already scheduled a vet appointment for Century, and a list of emergency veterinary clinics within 20 miles. "You came prepared," Thomas said, impressed despite himself. "I take commitment seriously." Marcus handed over the folder. "Everything's there. You can call any of those numbers, verify anything you want." Ellen studied the papers while Thomas studied Marcus. In daylight, he could see details the market had hidden: a scar along Marcus's jawline, the careful way he held his left shoulder, the watchfulness that never quite turned off. "Why night shift?" Thomas asked. "Man with your training could work anywhere." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Because night shift doesn't require me to make decisions that affect other people. I show up, I cut lumber according to specifications someone else determined. I go home. Simple. Safe. Doesn't sound like a SEAL's typical career path." "It's not." Marcus met his eyes. "But it's the path I need right now. Some of us come home whole. Some of us come home in pieces. I'm figuring out which pieces still work." Ellen looked up from the papers. "These all check out. Now we see your place." They drove together, Sentry in the back seat between Thomas and Ellen, Marcus at the wheel. The truck's heater worked. Actually worked, pumping warmth that made Thomas realize how long it had been since he'd felt genuinely warm. Marcus's rental house sat at Riverside's edge, where the town thinned into scattered homes and empty lots. Small, single-story, older but solid. He unlocked the door and stepped back, letting them enter first. The inside was almost aggressively plain. Minimal furniture, no decorations, everything clean and organized. But the heat was immediate and thorough. Thomas felt it wrap around him like a blanket he'd forgotten existed. "Thermostat set to 68, Marcus said. "I can adjust higher if she needs it." "That's warm enough to grow orchids," Ellen murmured, almost joking, but not quite. Marcus showed them the space he'd prepared for Sentry, a corner of the living room with a thick dog bed, bowls already filled with water and food, a basket of toys. "I wasn't sure what she'd like," Marcus admitted. "Got a variety." Sentry walked the perimeter of the house, methodical and thorough. She checked windows, tested doors, examined corners. Finally, she returned to the living room, circled twice on the dog bed, and lay down with a sigh that sounded like relief. "She's decided," Ellen said, her voice breaking slightly. Thomas crouched slowly, his knees protesting, until he was eye level with Sentry. The dog looked at him with those amber eyes that saw everything, judged nothing. "You be good," Thomas whispered. "You be safe. And you help him the way you helped us." Sentry's tail moved once. Agreement, maybe. Or goodbye. The exchange of money felt wrong. Marcus counted out 5 $20 bills, handed them to Thomas, and it felt like Thomas was selling part of his soul for the price of 2 weeks' groceries. "I'll send photos tonight," Marcus said. "Every week, same day, same time. You're always welcome to visit. Doors always open." They drove home in Marcus's truck because he insisted. When he dropped them off, he waited until they were inside before leaving. Small courtesy that said he still thought about people's safety, even when his own checklist was complete. Inside their cold house, Ellen sat at the kitchen table and cried. Not loud, not dramatic. Just tears that slid down her face while she stared at Preston Vale's business card, still sitting where Thomas had left it on the counter. "Maybe we should call him," she whispered. "Maybe he really can help." Thomas picked up the card, studied it. The embossed lettering caught the weak afternoon light. It looked so professional, so legitimate, so easy. "Tomorrow," he said. "Let's think about it tomorrow." But tomorrow came with a phone call that made thinking obsolete. The woman's voice was cheerful, automated, merciless. "This is Riverside Propane reminding you that payment is now 72 hours overdue. Disconnection will occur on January 29th at 9 a.m. unless full payment is received. Thank you for choosing Riverside Propane." Ellen looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at Preston's card. And across town, in a warm house with working heat, Sentry stood at the window and watched the street with amber eyes that missed nothing, protecting a man who didn't know yet that he'd taken home more than a dog. He'd taken home a witness to something darker than cold, something that was just beginning to show its teeth. Marcus didn't sleep the first night Sentry came home. He'd prepared for that. 15 years in the teams taught you that rest was optional, vigilance was not. What he hadn't prepared for was the way she refused to eat. The food sat untouched in her bowl for 3 hours. High-quality kibble, the kind the vet had recommended, mixed with a bit of wet food to make it appealing. Sentry circled it twice, sniffed it once, then returned to her position by the front door. Sitting, waiting, watching. "You need to eat," Marcus said, keeping his voice low and even. He'd learned early in his career that tone mattered more than words. "It's good food. Safe food." Sentry's ears flicked toward him, but her gaze stayed fixed on the door. Her posture was perfect, spine straight, weight distributed evenly, ready to move in any direction. Marcus recognized the stance because he'd worn it himself for years. Still wore it, if he was honest. He tried moving the bowl closer. She ignored it. He tried hand-feeding her a piece. She sniffed his palm politely, but didn't take the food. He tried the command he'd heard Thomas use at the market. "Sentry, at ease." Nothing. The dog remained locked in position, like a statue carved from tension. Marcus sat down on the floor 6 feet away from her, back against the wall, knees bent. He didn't try to touch her, or coax her, or convince her. He just sat. The house hummed around them, heater cycling, refrigerator running, wind testing the windows. Normal sounds, safe sounds, sounds that meant nothing to a dog who just lost everything familiar. An hour passed, then 2. Marcus's shift at the mill started at 11 p.m. He had 4 hours before he needed to leave, and he'd already decided he wasn't going to work tonight. He'd call in, use one of his carefully hoarded sick days, because leaving Sentry alone on her first night felt like abandonment, and he'd done enough of that in his life. At 10:30, Sentry finally moved. She stood, stretched in a way that said her muscles were stiff from holding position too long, then walked to her water bowl. She drank slowly, deliberately, her eyes never leaving the door. When she finished, she returned to her post. Marcus stood too, went to the kitchen, made himself a sandwich he didn't want. He ate it standing at the counter, watching her watch the door. "They're okay," he said quietly. "Thomas and Ellen. They're home right now, probably drinking tea, probably worrying about you the same way you're worrying about them. But they're okay." Sentry's tail moved once. Not a wag, more like acknowledgement that words had been spoken, even if they didn't change anything. Marcus finished his sandwich, cleaned up, then grabbed a blanket from the bedroom. He spread it on the floor near Sentry, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough to share space. He lay down on his side, one arm folded under his head, and waited. The heater clicked off. The house settled into deeper quiet. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the wall. Sentry tracked the light without moving her body, just her eyes following the pattern until it disappeared. Marcus closed his own eyes, not sleeping but resting in the way soldiers learned to rest. Present but conserved, ready but not rigid. He listened to Sentry breathe, counted the rhythm of it, let it become the metronome that kept his own breathing steady. Somewhere around midnight, he heard it. The soft click of nails on hardwood, moving closer. He didn't open his eyes, didn't move, didn't react. Sentry's breathing changed position. She was closer now, maybe 3 feet away instead of 6. He could feel her presence the way you could feel another person in a dark room, the displacement of air, the heat of another living thing. More time passed. Then he felt it, the lightest touch of a cold nose against his wrist. Just once. Testing. Asking permission, or giving it, he wasn't sure which. Marcus opened his eyes slowly. Sentry stood over him, her face close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her amber irises. She looked exhausted, scared, trying so hard to be brave that it was breaking something inside her. "I know," Marcus whispered. "I know what it's like when everything changes and you can't go back. When the orders stop making sense, but you still have to follow them. When you're trained to protect people who don't need you anymore." Sentry's ears came forward. She was listening with the intensity of someone who understood language wasn't just words. It was tone and intention, and the truth underneath both. "You did the right thing," Marcus continued. "Thomas and Ellen love you. They didn't want to let you go. But sometimes love means making the choice that hurts you, so it doesn't hurt them. You understand that better than most humans do." The dog sat, not at attention this time, just sat the way tired creatures sat when they'd been standing too long, and their bodies finally admitted defeat. Marcus sat up slowly, gave her space to move away if she wanted. She didn't. She stayed close, her shoulder almost touching his knee, her breath coming in short sighs that spoke of exhaustion deeper than physical. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, still keeping his voice quiet. "You're going to eat something. Not a lot, just enough. Then you're going to sleep, because you need it. And tomorrow we'll drive over to see Thomas and Ellen, let them know you're okay, let you see they're okay. We'll do that every few days until the visits feel normal instead of desperate. Sound good?" Sentry looked at the food bowl, then back at Marcus. The conflict in her eyes was so clear it hurt to witness. Want versus duty. Need versus loyalty. Self-preservation versus the training that said you protected others first and yourself never. "Stand down," Marcus said, using the military command he'd heard Thomas try at the market. "Mission's over for tonight. You're relieved." Something in Sentry's posture shifted. Not a collapse, but a controlled release, like pressure slowly escaping from something that had been holding too much for too long. She walked to the food bowl, ate exactly half the contents, then returned to Marcus. This time she lay down next to him, close enough that her back pressed against his leg. Not seeking comfort so much as confirming presence. "You're here. I'm here. We're both here." Marcus rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. They stayed like that until her breathing deepened and slowed, and finally settled into the rhythm of sleep that came with trust instead of exhaustion. Only then did Marcus let himself sleep too. He woke at 6 a.m. to find sentries still pressed against him, but her eyes were open, watching the morning light filter through the window. When he moved, she lifted her head, alert immediately, the soldier returning before the dog could fully emerge. "Morning," Marcus said. He stood, joints protesting, and stretched. "Let's get you outside." The backyard was small, fenced, dusted with snow that had fallen overnight. Sentry investigated it with the same methodical thoroughness she'd shown the house, checking perimeter, testing weak points, cataloging exits. When she finished, she did her business with the efficiency of someone who didn't waste time on unnecessary activities, then returned to Marcus's side. Back inside, he fed her breakfast. She ate without hesitation this time, as if sleep had reset something or given her permission to accept care. While she ate, Marcus made coffee and thought about the promise he'd made. Visit Thomas and Ellen today. Show them Sentry was adjusting. The phone rang at 7:15. Marcus almost didn't answer. Too early for work, too early for anything good. But something made him pick up. "Marcus Wade?" The voice was male, older, uncertain. "Speaking. This is Thomas Reeves. I'm sorry to call so early. I know you said we could visit any time, but I wanted to check. Is this too soon?" Marcus heard the tremor underneath the words, the fear being held back by pride so thin it was nearly transparent. "No, not too soon. I was planning to bring Sentry by today anyway. Everything okay?" A pause, long enough that Marcus's pulse quickened. "Define okay." "Thomas, what happened?" Another pause, then quietly. "The propane company disconnected us this morning. 9 a.m., just like they said. We're on day 3 now with no heat. Ellen's trying to pretend she's fine, but her lips are turning blue, and I can't stop her from shaking." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" "Because you already paid us $100 for our dog. We're not going to beg for more." "This isn't begging, this is—" Marcus stopped, recalibrated. Getting angry at Thomas's pride wouldn't help. "Can you get to a warm place? Library, church, anywhere?" "Library's closed Sundays. Church is 2 miles, and Ellen can't walk that far in this cold, not with her breathing the way it is." Marcus was already moving, grabbing his keys, his coat. Sentry stood immediately, reading his urgency. "I'm coming over. 20 minutes. Don't argue." "Marcus, we're not your responsibility." 20 minutes. "Keep Ellen warm as you can. We'll figure this out." He hung up before Thomas could protest further, grabbed Sentry's leash, and headed for the truck. The dog jumped in without hesitation, taking her position in the passenger seat like she'd been riding with him for years instead of hours. The drive to the Reeves house took 18 minutes. Marcus spent every one of them calculating options, running scenarios, trying to find the solution that didn't involve more money these people didn't have. By the time he pulled up to their small house on the edge of town, he'd eliminated everything except the one option he'd been avoiding. He had money. Not a lot, but enough. His needs were simple: rent, food, truck payment. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't spend on anything that wasn't essential. He'd been saving without purpose, just accumulating numbers in an account because saving was what responsible people did. But walking into the Reeves house and feeling the cold hit him like a physical wall, watching Ellen huddle under 3 blankets in a chair pulled close to the gas stove they'd turned on despite the cost, seeing Thomas's face gray with something deeper than cold. That changed the math. "How much?" Marcus asked, without preamble. "No," Thomas said immediately. "Absolutely not." "How much to get the propane turned back on?" We're not taking your money. You already did. $100. What's a little more? That was payment for Sentry, Ellen said, her voice shaking from cold. This would be charity. Marcus knelt in front of her chair, looked her straight in the eyes. Ma'am, with respect, you taught school for 30 years. You shaped kids' lives, taught them to read, to think, to be better than they were. Thomas served in Korea, came home and worked 40 years at the rail yard. You two have given more to this community than most people give in 3 lifetimes. So if the community gives something back, that's not charity. That's just math finally balancing. Ellen's eyes filled. We don't have a way to pay you back. I don't want you to pay me back. I want you to stay alive through winter. That's the payment. Thomas opened his mouth to argue, but Sentry made the decision for him. The dog walked directly to Ellen, placed her head in Ellen's lap, and looked up at her with eyes that said everything Marcus had been trying to communicate. You're my people. People protect their people. This is what protection looks like. Ellen broke. Her hand came up to stroke Sentry's head, and tears spilled down her cheeks, freezing halfway in the cold air. $463. That's what we owe. Marcus pulled out his phone, called the propane company. The representative who answered was cheerful in that automated way that made Marcus want to reach through the phone and shake some humanity into her. I'm calling about Thomas and Ellen Reeves, 47 Riverside Lane. I'm paying their balance, full amount, right now. And you are? A friend. You take credit cards? Yes, but I need authorization from the account holder to... Thomas, Marcus said, holding out the phone. Tell them I can pay. Thomas took the phone with shaking hands. This is Thomas Reeves. I authorize Marcus Wade to pay the balance on my account. Yes. Yes. All of it. He handed the phone back. 10 minutes later, it was done. The propane company promised to send a technician within 2 hours to restore service. Marcus hung up and found both Thomas and Ellen staring at him like he'd performed a magic trick instead of a credit card transaction. We'll pay you back, Thomas said hoarsely. No, you won't. But you will let me visit Sentry here sometimes, because she clearly still thinks this is her home too. Ellen nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Sentry had moved to sit between them, her body language finally relaxed in a way Marcus hadn't seen since he'd brought her home. She belonged here, would always belong here, even if she lived somewhere else. Marcus stayed until the technician arrived and restored the heat, watching the house slowly warm, seeing color return to Ellen's face, listening to Thomas's breathing ease. It felt like completing a mission, the good kind, the kind where everyone survived. On the drive back home, Sentry sat tall in the passenger seat, looking out the window. Marcus glanced at her and said, You knew they needed help. That's why you wouldn't settle last night. You were still on duty. The dog's tail wagged once. Confirmation, maybe. Or just acknowledgement that someone finally understood. That night, Marcus did go to work. Sentry waited at home without protest, somehow knowing that this separation was different from the permanent kind. The lumber mill smelled like sawdust and diesel, machine oil and sweat. Marcus clocked in at 11 p.m., nodded at the night shift supervisor, and took his position at the cut station. The work was exactly what he needed, repetitive, precise, requiring attention but not decision-making. Measure, mark, cut. Feed the wood through, check the blade, repeat. His hands knew the rhythm. His body found the pattern. His mind could finally stop calculating survival and just exist in the mechanical certainty of wood becoming boards, becoming something useful. Wade, the supervisor, a man named Jack who'd worked the mill for 30 years, appeared at his elbow. You called in sick yesterday. Everything okay? Yeah. New dog needed settling. Jack nodded. Heard you took in the Reeves Malinois. That was a good thing you did. Marcus kept his eyes on the cut line. How do you know about that? Small town, people talk. Especially when decorated seals start paying old folks' heating bills. Marcus's hands stilled on the wood. That's not public information. Your service record isn't. Your bank transaction yesterday is. Propane company receptionist is married to my cousin. She mentioned it. Jack paused. Don't worry. She mentioned it with respect, not gossip. Still shouldn't have gotten out. Maybe not. But here's what else got out. Preston Vale stopped by the Reeves place this morning, left with paperwork signed. Marcus looked up sharply. What kind of paperwork? Don't know. But I know Preston. He's been circling Riverside seniors for 6 months now, offering to manage their finances. I got an aunt who almost signed with him. I talked her out of it. Why? Because the numbers didn't add up. He promises to reduce costs, consolidate bills, maximize benefits. What actually happens is he takes control of their accounts, charges management fees that keep rising, and suddenly these old folks have less money than they started with. Jack met Marcus's eyes. Legal as Sunday church, mean as Saturday night, and hard to prove because everything's in the contracts. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. The same cold that came in Syria when intelligence said one thing and his gut said another. The same cold that came right before everything went wrong. The Reeves don't have money for him to manage, Marcus said carefully. They have a pension. Thomas's railroad pension has been accumulating for 40 years. Even if they're broke now, that pension's steady income. Guy can skim for steady income. They can skim for years before anyone notices them on autopilot. At 6 a.m., he clocked out, drove home, found Sentry waiting exactly where he'd left her. She greeted him with what almost looked like relief, and he understood. She'd been worried too. About Thomas, about Ellen, about things she couldn't prevent from 4 miles away. We need to check on them, Marcus said. Sentry was already at the door. They arrived at the Reeves house at 7:30. The heat was working. Marcus could see it in the windows, clear glass instead of frost-covered. But when Ellen opened the door, her expression stopped him cold. He was here, she said without greeting. Preston. He brought papers. Marcus stepped inside. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of documents like they were written in a language he'd forgotten how to read. What did you sign? Marcus asked, keeping his voice calm. Power of attorney, Thomas said dully. Limited financial power of attorney. It made sense when he explained it. He's going to handle our pension deposits, pay our bills directly, make sure nothing gets missed or delayed. We don't have to worry about anything anymore. Marcus picked up the top page, scanned it. The language was dense, legal, deliberately obscuring, but certain phrases jumped out. Management fee schedule, administrative costs, withdrawal penalties. How much is he charging you? Marcus asked. Thomas flipped pages until he found it. 40%. Marcus's head snapped up. 40% of what? Monthly pension. He takes 40% off the top for managing everything else. That's... Marcus stopped himself before the word insane could emerge. Getting emotional wouldn't help. Thomas, your pension is what, $1,800 a month? $1,920 after taxes. So Preston's taking $768 every month. To pay bills that total what? Ellen pulled out a notebook, her teacher's organization showing through panic. $1,300, roughly. Propane, electric, water, insurance, medication. So you're paying him almost $800 to manage $1,300 in bills? Thomas's face was gray. He said it was industry standard, that professional financial management always costs more upfront but saves money long-term through better rates and consolidated services. Marcus sat down heavily. Did he mention that those better rates come from companies he has kickback agreements with? Or that consolidated services means he routes everything through vendors who pay him commissions? Ellen's hand covered her mouth. Oh God. We are old, Thomas said quietly. We are old and stupid, and we fell for it. You're not stupid, Marcus said firmly. You're scared and tired, and facing systems designed to confuse you. Preston counts on that. It's predatory, but it's legal. Probably. Sentry moved to Thomas's side, pressed against his leg. The old man's hand dropped to her head automatically, finding comfort in the familiar weight of her. Marcus pulled out his phone. I know someone. She might be able to help. The someone was Sheriff Dale Brennan, a man Marcus knew from VA meetings but had never called for help. Dale answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. Wade, it's Sunday morning. I know. I need advice. Elder financial abuse, predatory contracts. Legal, but wrong. Dale was quiet for a moment, then fully awake. Give me the address. I'll be there in 30. While they waited, Marcus read every page of Preston's contract. The more he read, the worse it got. Thomas had signed away not just financial control, but also decision-making power over property maintenance, healthcare choices, even vehicle registration. One clause authorized Preston to sell the Reeves house if he determined they could no longer maintain it safely. Did he explain this part? Marcus pointed. Thomas leaned over, read it, went pale. No. He said it was standard safety language. Protection for us. It's protection for him. If you can't pay his fees, he sells your house, takes his cut from the proceeds, and warehouses you in senior living, where he probably also gets kickbacks. Ellen made a sound like something breaking. Thomas just stared at the paper, his hands shaking. When Dale arrived, he brought coffee and a calm authority that filled the room. He read the contracts in silence, his jaw tightening with each page. This is breathtaking, Dale said finally. Legal, technically, but designed to extract maximum value while providing minimum service. He looked at Thomas. When did you sign this? Yesterday, about 2 p.m. You have 72 hours to revoke. Montana law allows 3-day cancellation on contracts involving financial services for seniors. Ellen grabbed the table edge. We can cancel? If we do it right. Written notice delivered to Preston's office before Wednesday at 2 p.m., and we need to do it in a way that prevents him from claiming he never received it. Dale pulled out his own phone. I'm calling the county recorder. We'll file the cancellation formally, create a paper trail he can't ignore. Marcus watched relief bloom on the Reeves' faces and felt the cold in his chest ease slightly. But Sentry remained tense, her eyes on the door, her posture saying what Marcus's training already knew. Predators didn't surrender territory easily, and they'd just declared war on one. Preston Vale's response arrived before noon, not by mail or phone, but in person. His BMW pulled up to the Reeves house with the confidence of someone who owned the street it sat on. Marcus watched through the window as Preston emerged, portfolio under his arm, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He's here, Marcus said quietly. Dale stood from the kitchen table. Good. Let him come. But Thomas was already at the door, opening it before Preston could knock. The old man's jaw was set in that stubborn line Marcus recognized from the market, The one that said pride had found its spine again. "Mr. Reeves," Preston said warmly. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in. Make sure everything's processing smoothly with the paperwork." "We're canceling," Thomas said. No preamble, no apology. Preston's smile held. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "The contract. We're exercising our 72-hour right to cancel. Sheriff Brennan helped us file the notice this morning." For the first time, Preston's expression shifted. Not much, just a tightening around his mouth that said he hadn't expected resistance with teeth. His eyes moved past Thomas, found Dale standing in the kitchen doorway, then landed on Marcus sitting at the table with Sentry at his feet. "I see you've had advisors," Preston said, his voice cooling by degrees. "Mr. Wade, isn't it? The lumber mill worker." Marcus didn't stand, didn't react. "That's right." "Interesting how quickly you've involved yourself in the Reeves' private affairs. One might question your motives." "One might," Marcus agreed. "Or one might notice you showed up here less than 24 hours after they desperately needed money, with a contract designed to extract 40% of their fixed income in perpetuity. That's not help, that's circling." Preston's smile vanished completely. "I provide a legitimate service that helps seniors navigate complex financial systems. Everything in that contract is legal and clearly stated." "Clearly stated in 8-point font across 17 pages of legal language," Dale said, stepping forward. "Mr. Reeves has filed formal cancellation. You're required to acknowledge receipt and cease all account access within 24 hours. "I'll need to consult with my attorney." "You have 24 hours, Dale repeated. "Not negotiable, not optional. Montana Statute 30-9-302. I can cite the rest if you'd like, but I don't think that's necessary." Preston's jaw worked like he was chewing words too bitter to swallow. He looked at Thomas again, and Marcus saw the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. Assessing, measuring, deciding how much fight was worth the prize. "This is a mistake," Preston said finally. "I was genuinely trying to help. But if you prefer to struggle on your own, that's your choice." He turned to leave, then paused. "Although I should mention, there's a lien on this property that you may not be aware of. Previous owner's unpaid property taxes from 2019. It's scheduled for collection this spring. I had planned to negotiate that for you as part of my services, but now..." He let the threat hang in the air like smoke. Ellen's hand found Thomas's arm. "What's he talking about?" "There's no lien," Dale said firmly. "I checked the property records this morning. Clear title, taxes current." Preston shrugged. "Perhaps I was misinformed. Or perhaps the lien hasn't been filed yet. These things can be complicated." He looked directly at Marcus. "You should be careful, Mr. Wade. Playing hero can be expensive, especially when you don't understand all the variables." Sentry stood. The movement was fluid and deliberate, and suddenly she was between Preston and the room, her body language shifting from neutral to warning. She didn't bark or growl. She simply stood there, radiating a threat that needed no translation. Preston took a step back. "Control your animal." "She is controlled," Marcus said quietly. "She's just doing her job." "Which is?" "Recognizing predators." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Preston's face went through several emotions: anger, calculation, contempt, before settling on the practiced neutrality of someone retreating to fight another day. "You'll regret this," Preston said. Not to Thomas or Ellen, but to Marcus. Personal. Direct. All of you. He left without waiting for a response. His BMW kicked up slush as he accelerated away, too fast for a residential street, the spray hitting the Reeves mailbox like a parting insult. Thomas closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly looking every one of his 76 years. What if he's right? What if there is a lien? There isn't, Dale said. But even if there was, threatening you with it is witness tampering. He just made a mistake. Ellen sat down heavily. He knows where we live. He knows we're vulnerable. What's to stop him from… She couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus stood, and Sentry immediately moved to his side. I am. We are. You can't watch us 24 hours a day, Thomas said. You have work. You have a life. My work is nights. My life is… Marcus stopped, recalibrated. You took care of Sentry when you couldn't afford to feed yourselves. That makes us family. Family protects family. The word hung in the air, too big and too true for anyone to argue with. Ellen's eyes filled, and Thomas had to look away, blinking hard. Dale's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. We've got a problem. That was the county recorder. Someone just filed an emergency protective order against Thomas Reeves. What? Thomas's voice cracked. For what? Dale scrolled through the message. Financial incompetence. Claims you're a danger to yourself due to diminished mental capacity. Requests immediate court-appointed guardian to manage your affairs pending psychiatric evaluation. The words hit like physical blows. Ellen made a sound that might have been a sob or a curse. Thomas just stood there, shock draining the color from his face. That's insane, Marcus said. He was fine 2 hours ago when he signed the cancellation. Preston's retaliating, Dale said grimly. He files this, gets a friendly judge, and by Wednesday he's your court-appointed guardian with full legal authority. The cancellation becomes irrelevant because Thomas is declared incompetent to have signed it in the first place. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, the kind that used to get channeled into missions and operations, but now had nowhere to go except inward, where it burned like acid. How is that legal? It's not supposed to be. But emergency orders get rubber-stamped all the time, especially if the judge doesn't know the context. Preston knows the system. He's used it before. On who? Ellen demanded. Dale hesitated, then said, Rosa Chen, Frank Okoye, at least 4 others I know of. All seniors living alone, all facing financial difficulties, all suddenly declared incompetent right around the time they tried to fire him. What happens to them? Thomas asked quietly. Rosa's still fighting. Frank died before the case resolved. The others settled, which means Preston got paid to go away. Marcus's hands were shaking, not from fear, from the familiar sensation of seeing injustice wrapped in paperwork and procedure, legal violence that left no bruises, but destroyed lives just as thoroughly as bullets. This was what he'd walked away from. This was why he cut lumber at night instead of making decisions that affected people's fates. But watching Thomas Reeves face destruction while following every rule, doing everything right, trusting systems that were supposed to protect him, that was Syria all over again. Different uniforms, same outcome. Innocence sacrificed on the altar of protocol. No, Marcus said. The word came out harder than he intended. This doesn't happen. Not to them. Dale looked at him carefully. Marcus, I understand how you feel, but we have to work within… Within what? The system that just weaponized a psychiatric evaluation against a man whose only crime was being poor and old? Marcus's voice rose despite his efforts to control it. The system that lets Preston Vale destroy lives because he knows which forms to file and which judges to call? I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's reality. Then reality needs to change. Marcus turned to Thomas and Ellen. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Ellen nodded immediately. Thomas took longer. his eyes searching Marcus's face for something. Certainty, maybe. Or courage. Or just the belief that resistance wasn't futile. "What are you going to do?" Thomas asked. "Something I've been avoiding for 5 years." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled through contacts he hadn't accessed in years, found the number he needed. "I'm calling someone who knows how to fight dirty without breaking laws." The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, sharp and professional. "Jordan Reeves?" Marcus put it on speaker. "Ms. Reeves, my name is Marcus Wade. I'm calling about your parents." The silence that followed was loaded with 1,000 unspoken fears. When Jordan spoke again, her voice had lost its professional edge. "Are they hurt? Are they okay?" "Physically, yes. Legally, they're under attack. Do you know a man named Preston Vale?" "No. Should I?" Marcus explained in short, brutal sentences. The pension freeze, the propane disconnection, Preston's contract, the cancellation, the retaliatory competency filing. He didn't soften anything or try to spare her feelings. She needed to understand the scope of what they were facing. When he finished, Jordan was quiet for so long he thought the call had dropped. Then, "I'm in Seattle. I can be there by tonight. Don't let them sign anything. Don't let anyone talk to them without a lawyer present. And tell my father." Her voice broke slightly. "Tell him I'm sorry it took this long." Ellen was crying openly now. Thomas had his arms around her, his own eyes wet, his jaw still set in that stubborn line. After Jordan hung up, Dale said, "That helps, but it doesn't solve the immediate problem. The competency hearing is scheduled for Tuesday morning. Judge Martin Howard, 9 a.m. "Howard," Marcus repeated. "I know that name. He's been on the bench for 20 years. Good reputation, fair decisions. But he's also overworked and tends to trust professional assessments at face value." Preston's assessment. "Unless we provide a counter-assessment by tomorrow afternoon." Dale checked his watch. "It's Sunday. Getting a psychiatrist to evaluate Thomas on 12 hours' notice is—" "I know someone," Marcus interrupted. The words surprised him as much as they surprised Dale. "Dr. Carla Jensen. She's a VA counselor. She does competency evaluations for veteran benefit claims." "Will she work Sundays?" "For this? Yeah, she will." Marcus made the call, explained the situation, heard Carla's sharp intake of breath, followed by the immediate shift into professional mode. She'd be there in 2 hours. Bring all medical records, all financial documents, and be prepared for a thorough evaluation. While they waited, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He opened his laptop and started researching. Not casually, but the way he'd researched targets and threats and mission parameters. He pulled county records, cross-referenced business filings, traced corporate structures. He found Senior Financial Solutions registered to a P.O. box in Nevada, but operating out of Montana. He found 17 complaints filed with the State Banking Commission, all dismissed for lack of evidence. He found Preston's name connected to 3 other companies, all providing similar services, all with similar complaint histories. The pattern was clear. Preston moved from place to place, stayed long enough to extract maximum value, then dissolved the company and started fresh under a new name in a new town. Legal, systematic, devastating. Sentry stayed close to Marcus the entire time, her presence grounding him when the research threatened to pull him back into the operational mindset he'd worked so hard to escape. She'd rest her chin on his knee periodically, a gentle reminder that he was here, now, helping, not over there, then, failing. Carla arrived at 3 p.m., carrying a professional bag and a competence that filled the room. She was tall, athletic, with dark hair pulled back and brown eyes that assessed without judging. She shook everyone's hands, gave Sentry a brief scratch behind the ears, then got to work. The evaluation took 90 minutes. She tested Thomas's memory, his decision-making ability, his understanding of financial concepts, his awareness of current events. She reviewed his medical history, his medication list, his cognitive baseline from VA records. She asked questions that seemed simple, but revealed deeper processing. Why did he sign Preston's contract? What made him decide to cancel? How did he feel about his daughter's reaction? Thomas answered everything clearly, thoughtfully, sometimes with frustration at his own past choices, but never with confusion about what those choices were. He was sharp, present, fully aware of his circumstances and their implications. When Carla finished, she sat back and said, "Mr. Reeves, you are many things. Financially stressed, certainly. Medically challenged, yes. Trusting, to a fault, perhaps. But diminished mental capacity? Absolutely not. Anyone who claims otherwise is either incompetent themselves or deliberately lying." Ellen grabbed Thomas's hand. "You'll testify to that?" "I'll write a report tonight and file it with the court tomorrow morning. And yes, I'll testify if need." Carla looked at Marcus. "This is elder abuse, textbook predatory guardianship. How did Preston think he'd get away with it?" "Because he has before," Marcus said. "Multiple times." Carla's jaw tightened. Then it's time someone stopped him. After she left, Dale made more calls. He contacted the State Banking Commission, the Attorney General's Office, Adult Protective Services. He built a file, assembled evidence, created the paper trail that would matter in court. But even as he worked, Marcus could see the doubt in his eyes. The system moved slowly. Preston moved fast. Night fell. Dale went home to prepare for Tuesday's hearing. Ellen made dinner that no one was hungry for, but everyone ate anyway because normalizing routines felt like resistance. Thomas sat with Sentry, stroking her head in long, slow movements that seemed to calm them both. Marcus stood at the window, watching the street for threats that wouldn't announce themselves with guns or explosives, but with legal forms and court orders. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "You're making a mistake. Walk away while you still can." He showed it to Thomas. The old man read it and said, "Preston? Probably. Are you going to walk away?" Marcus thought about Syria, about the intelligence that said the building was empty, about the breach order he'd given, about the small body he'd carried out afterward, wrapped in a blanket that couldn't hide what had been lost, about the medal they'd given him for saving hostages, and the nightmares that came from following correct procedure straight into tragedy. He'd walked away from decision-making because he didn't trust himself anymore. He'd chosen lumber and sawdust and night shifts because those choices only affected wood, not lives. But walking away from Thomas and Ellen wasn't safety. It was cowardice dressed up as caution. "No," Marcus said. "I'm not walking away." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then neither are we." That night, Marcus didn't go to work. He called Jack, explained he needed emergency leave, personal crisis. Jack didn't ask questions, just said the job would be there when Marcus was ready to come back. If he came back. Marcus stayed at the Reeves house, sleeping on their couch with Sentry on the floor beside him. Every hour he woke, checked the doors, confirmed the locks, listened to the house breathe around them. Old habits died hard. Maybe they shouldn't die at all. Monday morning arrived with Jordan Reeves. She pulled up in a rental car at 6 a.m., looking like she'd driven through the night without stopping. Tall like her father, sharp like her mother, wearing a business suit that said corporate lawyer, but eyes that said daughter, terrified she'd arrived too late. Elle opened the door and Jordan stepped through, saw her parents standing there, alive and together. and broke. She grabbed them both, held on like drowning, and whispered apologies into her mother's shoulder while her father patted her back with hands that shook. Marcus gave them space, took sentry outside. The morning was cold but clear, the kind of Montana winter day that punished you for existing, but rewarded you with beauty if you survived long enough to see it. He threw a stick for Sentry, watched her retrieve it with the focused intensity she brought to everything, and tried to quiet the voice in his head that kept running mission scenarios and failure probabilities. When he came back inside, Jordan was sitting at the kitchen table with documents spread in front of her, reading with the speed and precision of someone trained to find the important details buried in legal language. She looked up when Marcus entered. "You're Marcus Wade?" "Yes, ma'am. You paid my parents' propane bill, bought their dog, called me when they wouldn't. Why?" Marcus considered several answers and settled on truth. "Because I needed to." Jordan studied him with eyes that had spent years evaluating witnesses and detecting lies. Whatever she saw satisfied her because she nodded and said, "Thank you. For everything." "Don't thank me yet. Preston's still moving." "Let him move. I've dealt with predators in boardrooms who make Preston Vale look like amateur hour." She tapped the contract. "This is sophisticated work, I'll give him that. But he made mistakes. The withdrawal penalty clause contradicts the cancellation rights disclosure. The fee schedule is buried in an appendix that's not referenced in the signature section. And this?" She pointed to a paragraph near the end. "This grants him power of attorney over healthcare decisions, but it's not properly witnessed according to Montana statute." "The whole thing might be voidable on technical grounds alone." "Might?" "Depends on the judge. Howard's fair, but he's also conservative. He won't void a contract lightly." Jordan pulled out her laptop. "But we don't need to void it. We just need to prove Preston filed the competency claim in bad faith. That's witness tampering, and it gives us grounds for a restraining order and possible criminal charges." Marcus felt something unlock in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or just relief that someone who knew how to fight this kind of battle had finally shown up. They spent the day preparing. Jordan interviewed her parents, built a timeline, assembled evidence. Carla's evaluation arrived by email at noon, devastating in its clinical precision. Marcus provided the research he'd compiled, the pattern of Preston's previous operations, the complaints, and the corporate shell games. By evening, they had something that looked less like desperation and more like strategy. Dale stopped by at 7, reviewed everything, and allowed himself a small smile. This might actually work. "Might?" Ellen echoed Marcus's earlier question. "Howard's unpredictable, but we've got a solid case. Tomorrow we'll tell." That night, Marcus finally went home. Sentry came with him, reluctant to leave the Reeves, but responding to his command. In the truck, she sat in the passenger seat and looked at him with those amber eyes that saw too much. "They'll be okay," Marcus told her. "Jordan's there. Dale's watching. We did what we could." Sentry's tail thumped once against the seat. Trust, maybe, or just acknowledgement that he'd tried. At home, Marcus finally let himself feel the exhaustion that had been building for 3 days. He fed Sentry, showered, and collapsed into bed. Sleep came fast and hard, dreamless for once, his body finally convinced it could rest because the mission wasn't over, but at least the next phase was planned. He woke at 3 a.m. to Sentry's low growl. The dog was at the bedroom door, body rigid, ears forward. Marcus was on his feet immediately, pulse already elevated, reaching for the knife he kept on the nightstand from pure instinct. He moved through the house silently, Sentry at his side, clearing rooms with the muscle memory that never quite left. Nothing in the living room, nothing in the kitchen, nothing anywhere. But when he opened the front door, he found it. A manila envelope taped to the door, his name written in neat block letters across the front. He pulled it down, brought it inside, opened it carefully. Inside were photographs. Him and Sentry at the Reeves house. Him and Dale at the sheriff's office. Him and Jordan at the coffee shop where they'd met for 30 minutes that afternoon to review strategy. All recent. All surveilled. All proof that Preston was watching every move. And underneath the photos, a single typed note. Heroism is expensive, Mr. Wade, especially when you're just a lumber mill worker playing above his pay grade. Last chance to walk away. Next time, I won't ask nicely. Marcus stared at the photos, at the evidence of how thoroughly he'd been tracked, and felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not anger. Something colder and clearer. The operational mindset he'd tried to suppress, coming back online whether he wanted it or not. Sentry leaned against his leg, grounding him. He looked down at her and said, "He thinks he's hunting us. He doesn't realize we've been hunting him." Tomorrow was Tuesday. Tomorrow was court. Tomorrow, Preston Vale would learn what happened when you threatened someone who'd spent 15 years learning how predators think. And this time, Marcus wasn't going to walk away. Marcus didn't call Dale about the photographs. Not yet. Instead, he spent the hours before dawn doing what SEALs did best, gathering intelligence. He photographed the envelope, the pictures, the note. He checked his truck for tracking devices and found one magnetic unit attached to the undercarriage. He left it there. Let Preston think he was still invisible. By 6 a.m., Marcus had traced the envelope's origin. The tape was generic, available at any hardware store, but the photographs had a timestamp in the corner, metadata that Preston's surveillance contractor had forgotten to strip. Marcus pulled the contractor's business license, found 3 prior complaints for illegal surveillance, and sent everything to Dale with a single text. He made mistakes. Dale's response came immediately. "See you in court." The Riverside County Courthouse was a squat brick building that wore its age badly, linoleum floors scuffed by decades of desperate people seeking justice that came slowly, if it came at all. Marcus arrived at 8:30 with Sentry, found Thomas and Ellen already there with Jordan. Thomas wore a suit that had last been pressed for a funeral. Ellen a dress that hung loose on her frame. They looked terrified and trying not to show it. Jordan, by contrast, looked like she'd dressed for war. Charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, her dark hair pulled back so severely it could have been tactical. She carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Marcus's truck payment, and held herself with the coiled energy of someone who'd won battles in rooms that made this courthouse look like a church basement. "You're early," Jordan said when she saw Marcus. "Old habit." "Good one to keep," she glanced at Sentry. "She allowed in there?" "Service animal exemption. I called ahead." Jordan nodded approval, then noticed something in Marcus's expression. "What happened?" He handed her his phone with the photos pulled up. Jordan's face went through several expressions: shock, anger, calculation, before settling on cold fury. "He's surveilling you." "That's illegal without a court order. That's the least of what he did." Marcus showed her the metadata, the contractor's license, the complaints. He hired someone with a history, someone Dale's office has cited before. That's not coincidence, that's pattern. Jordan's eyes lit with the kind of predatory satisfaction lawyers got when opponents handed them ammunition. "This is beautiful. Preston just gave us probable cause for everything." Dale arrived at 8:45, carrying a folder thick enough to function as a weapon. He pulled Jordan and Marcus aside, voice low. "Howard's clerk just called. Preston filed an emergency motion this morning claiming Thomas made threats against him yesterday. wants a protective order and immediate guardianship appointment for safety reasons. Ellen overheard. "That's a lie. Thomas never—" "I know," Dale said, "but Preston's counting on Howard not having time to verify. Emergency motions get fast-tracked. If Howard grants it, Thomas loses all legal standing before we even start the competency hearing." "Can he do that?" Marcus asked. "If Howard believes him, yes. We have maybe 15 minutes before the judge takes the bench to convince him otherwise." Jordan was already moving, heels clicking on linoleum like rounds chambering. "Where's Howard's chambers?" They found Judge Martin Howard in his office, a man in his mid-60s with silver hair and the worn-down patience of someone who'd heard every lie people could tell. He looked up when Jordan knocked, his expression suggesting he'd already had too much Monday morning for Tuesday. "Ms. Reeves, I presume, and Sheriff Brennan. This about the Reeves matter?" "It is, Your Honor," Jordan said. "We need to address Mr. Vale's emergency motion before you hear it." Howard's eyebrows rose. "That's irregular." "So is filing false claims of threats to circumvent proper procedure." "Your Honor, may I present evidence?" Marcus watched Jordan work, and it was like watching a different species of fighter. No raised voice, no dramatic gestures, just calm, surgical presentation of facts. The surveillance photos, the contractor's history, the pattern of Preston's prior cases. The timeline showing Preston's motion was filed 60 minutes after Dale filed the counter-assessment, suggesting retaliation rather than legitimate concern. Howard listened without interrupting, his expression giving nothing away. When Jordan finished, he sat back in his chair. "You're alleging Mr. Vale is abusing the court's emergency procedures." "I'm alleging he's using them as weapons, Your Honor. This is his 4th emergency guardianship filing in 18 months. Each one filed immediately after a senior tried to terminate his services. Each one claiming urgent safety concerns. And each time he withdraws the motion once he extracts a settlement." "That's a serious accusation." "It's a documented pattern." Jordan pulled out a spreadsheet Marcus hadn't seen before. Names and dates aligned in columns that told a story numbers couldn't lie about. Rosa Chen, emergency filing 3 days after she tried to fire him. Withdrew after she paid him $6,000 to go away. Frank Okoye, same pattern. Died before resolution. 4 others, all settled within 2 weeks. "Your Honor, this isn't protection. It's extortion in a suit." Howard studied the spreadsheet for a long moment. Then he looked at Dale. "Sheriff, what's your assessment?" "Preston Vale is running a predatory operation that targets vulnerable seniors. He's careful, he's legal, and he's systematic. But Ms. Reeves is right. The pattern shows intent. This emergency motion is retaliation, not safety concern." Howard closed the file. "I'll hear arguments on the competency claim only. The emergency motion is denied without prejudice. If Mr. Vale has legitimate safety concerns, he can file through proper channels with proper evidence." Relief flooded through Marcus so hard his knees almost buckled. Beside him, Thomas made a sound like air escaping from something that had been holding pressure too long. "Thank you, Your Honor," Jordan said. They filed into the courtroom at 9 sharp. Preston was already there with his attorney, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in making unpleasant things sound reasonable. Preston sat perfectly still, but Marcus could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw worked when he saw them enter. When Preston's eyes landed on Sentry, something shifted in his expression. Not fear, exactly. Recognition, maybe, that the game had changed in ways he hadn't planned for. Judge Howard took the bench and reviewed the filings with the speed of someone who'd read them before court started. "We're here on an emergency petition for guardianship based on alleged mental incompetence. Mr. Vale, you filed this claim. Present your evidence." Preston's attorney stood, smooth and practiced. Your Honor, Mr. Reeves is a 76-year-old man with declining cognitive function who recently made erratic financial decisions that endangered his and his wife's welfare. He signed a professional financial management agreement with my client, then revoked it less than 24 hours later under influence from third parties with questionable motives. This pattern of instability, combined with his age and documented medical issues, suggests he lacks capacity to manage his own affairs. What medical issues? Howard asked. Chronic respiratory condition, early-stage dementia indicators, recent hospitalization. He was never hospitalized, Jordan interrupted, standing. Your Honor, may I? Howard nodded. Mr. Reeves experienced mild carbon monoxide exposure from a faulty heater. A heater my father would never have needed if Mr. Vale hadn't orchestrated the financial crisis that forced him to choose between heat and food. He was treated at the scene by paramedics and released. No hospitalization, no dementia diagnosis. Mr. Vale is fabricating medical history to justify a predatory guardianship. Preston's attorney recovered quickly. Your Honor, the medical records don't exist, Jordan cut in. Because there was no hospitalization. What does exist is Dr. Carla Jensen's comprehensive evaluation completed yesterday, which found Mr. Reeves fully competent, cognitively intact, and capable of understanding complex financial decisions. She's here to testify if needed. Carla stood from the gallery, professional and unshakable. Howard looked at her, then at Preston's attorney. Do you have any actual medical evidence of incompetence? The attorney shuffled papers. We were operating on Mr. Vale's observations of concerning behavior. Observations aren't evidence, Howard said flatly. What else do you have? The erratic decision-making, Your Honor. Signing a contract, then immediately revoking it suggests impaired judgment. Thomas stood before Jordan could stop him. Your Honor, may I speak? Howard hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, Mr. Reeves. I signed that contract because I was desperate, and Mr. Vale made it sound like salvation. I revoked it because my daughter, who's a corporate attorney, read it and explained I just signed away my house and my pension for 40% monthly fees. That's not impaired judgment. That's learning I almost got scammed and fixing it while I still could. The courtroom went silent. Even Preston's attorney seemed at a loss for words. Howard leaned forward. Mr. Vale, why does your contract charge 40% management fees? Preston stood, confident despite the shifting ground. Your Honor, my company provides comprehensive financial services that 40%, Howard repeated, to pay bills that total less than the pension amount. Where's the service that justifies taking 40% of a fixed income? Industry standard for high-touch senior financial management. Industry standard is 3 to 5%, Jordan said. Mr. Vale's fees are predatory by any reasonable measure. And, Your Honor, there's something else the court should know. She pulled out a document Marcus hadn't seen before. Senior Financial Solutions is not licensed as a fiduciary in Montana. They're registered in Nevada as a business consulting firm, but they're providing financial management services here without proper state licensing. Every contract they've executed is potentially void. Preston's face went white. His attorney flipped through his own papers, clearly not having checked this detail. Howard's expression darkened. Mr. Vale, is this accurate? Preston's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His attorney recovered first. Your Honor, there may be some administrative confusion about licensing categories. Administrative confusion, Howard repeated, voice cold. You're operating an unlicensed financial services business in my county, executing binding contracts with vulnerable seniors, and when they try to escape, you file emergency competency claims. Does that about sum it up? The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Marcus watched Preston's carefully constructed facade crack piece by piece, the smooth operator giving way to a cornered predator deciding whether to fight or flee. "Your Honor," Preston said carefully, "I've been providing legitimate services without a license. To seniors you then claim are incompetent when they question your fees." Howard closed the file. "Petition denied. Mr. Reeves retains full capacity and all legal rights. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the State Banking Commission and the Attorney General's Office for investigation into unlicensed financial services and potential elder abuse." Dale stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a temporary restraining order preventing Mr. Vale from contacting the Reeves family or any other Riverside seniors pending investigation." "Granted. Mr. Vale, you're to have no contact with the Reeves family, direct or indirect. You're also ordered to provide the court with a full list of Montana clients within 48 hours. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel came down like thunder. Preston stood frozen, his attorney already gathering papers with the practiced urgency of someone planning an exit strategy. Then Preston turned and looked directly at Marcus. No smile now, no practiced charm. Just cold fury and the promise of consequences. "This isn't over," Preston said quietly enough that only Marcus heard. "Yeah," Marcus said. "It is." They spilled out of the courtroom into the hallway, Ellen crying openly, Thomas looking dazed and relieved and exhausted all at once. Jordan accepted congratulations from Dale with the professional courtesy of someone who'd just won, but knew the war wasn't finished. Carla shook everyone's hands, then pulled Marcus aside. "You did good," she said. "I didn't do anything. Jordan did the work. You made the calls. You stayed. That's harder than legal briefs." She paused. "How are you holding up?" Marcus knew what she was really asking. Whether getting involved, making decisions that affected people's lives, was triggering the guilt that had sent him to night shifts and solitude. But looking at Thomas and Ellen, watching them hold each other like survivors of a storm they'd barely weathered, Marcus felt something unexpected. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but the absence of the crushing weight that usually came with responsibility. He'd made decisions. People had benefited. No one had died. "I'm okay," he said, and meant it. They celebrated at a diner 3 blocks from the courthouse, cramped into a booth designed for 4 but holding 6 when Sentry curled under the table. Ellen couldn't stop touching Thomas's hand, like she was confirming he was real and still hers. Jordan kept checking her phone, already building the next phase of defense. "He'll come after you," Jordan said, looking at Marcus. "Preston. He's lost face, lost clients, and he knows you're the one who started it." "Let him come." "I'm serious. Men like Preston don't fold when they lose. They escalate." "So do I," Marcus said quietly. Dale's phone buzzed. He read the message, and his expression shifted. "Preston just filed voluntary dissolution of Senior Financial Solutions. The company's defunct as of an hour ago." "He's running," Jordan said. "Probably. But here's the thing. Dissolution doesn't erase his debts or his legal exposure, and he owes restitution to at least 7 seniors I know of. Rosa Chen alone has a claim for $12,000. Ellen set down her coffee. "She'll never see that money, will she?" "Not from Preston," Dale admitted. "When these guys run, they take everything liquid. What's left is paperwork and empty accounts." The celebration dimmed. They'd won, yes. Thomas was safe. But the money Preston had already stolen, The fees he'd extracted, the damage he'd done before they stopped him. That was gone. Justice had arrived, but the bill was already paid in other people's suffering. Marcus felt the familiar weight returning. They'd saved Thomas, but couldn't save Frank Okoye, who died before his case resolved. Couldn't restore what Rosa had lost. Couldn't undo the months of fear and desperation Preston had inflicted before anyone noticed the pattern. Victory felt hollow when you counted what it cost the people who'd already lost. Jordan must have seen it in his face because she reached across the table. We stopped him. That counts. Does it count for the 7 people he already destroyed? It counts for the 70 he won't destroy next. She squeezed his hand. You can't save everyone, Marcus. Sometimes you just save who's in front of you, and make sure the predator can't circle back. After lunch, Jordan pulled Marcus outside while the others settled the bill. The day had warmed slightly, Montana winter giving them a brief reprieve that felt unearned. I need to ask you something, Jordan said. My firm in Seattle wants me back by Thursday, but I'm thinking about staying. In Riverside? Yeah, opening a practice here. Elder law, veteran advocacy, sliding scale fees. She looked toward the diner window where her parents sat. I left them alone too long. Let pride and distance and my own ambition convince me they were fine without me. They almost weren't. They're fine now. Because you intervened. A stranger cared more about my parents' welfare than their own daughter did. That's not true. It's true enough to hurt. Jordan's voice caught. I spent 5 years building a career defending corporations in contract disputes, making sure rich people stayed rich. Meanwhile, my parents were selling their dog to survive winter. That's not the lawyer I wanted to be. Marcus understood that kind of reckoning. The moment when what you'd become looked different than what you'd intended. When success in one measure revealed failure in another. Riverside could use a lawyer who gives a damn, he said. Yeah, it could. Jordan smiled, fragile but real. My firm won't be happy. I'm 3 months from making partner. But you'd be happy? She thought about it. I'd be useful. That might be better. They drove Thomas and Ellen home, made sure the heat was working, confirmed the locks were strong. Dale promised to increase patrols on their street until they were certain Preston had actually left town. Carla scheduled a follow-up evaluation for next month, just to maintain documentation of Thomas's competency. When Marcus finally got home with Sentry, exhaustion hit him like a physical force. He'd been running on adrenaline and mission focus for 3 days, and now that the immediate threat had passed, his body was demanding payment. He collapsed on the couch. Sentry jumped up beside him, something she'd never done before, and rested her head on his chest. He started to correct her, furniture was off limits, then decided rules could bend for dogs who'd helped save lives. We did good, didn't we, girl? He murmured. Sentry's tail thumped against the cushion. Agreement, or just contentment. He wasn't sure it mattered. Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Wade? A woman's voice, older, uncertain. My name is Rosa Chen. Dale Brennan gave me your number. I hope that's all right. Of course, Mrs. Chen. How can I help you? I heard what you did. For the Reeves family. How you stopped Preston Vale. She paused. I lost $12,000 to that man. My late husband's life insurance. I'll never get it back, will I? Marcus closed his eyes. Probably not. I'm sorry. Don't be. You stopped him from taking more. From taking from others. Her voice strengthened. I want to help, however I can.
If there are other seniors being targeted, other predators like Preston, I want to fight back. I'm tired of being invisible."
Something sparked in Marcus's chest, an idea forming, taking shape. "Mrs. Chen, what if we made sure you weren't invisible? What if we built something that noticed when people like Preston started circling? A network, maybe. People watching out for each other."
Like a neighborhood watch?
Like that, but bigger. Marcus sat up, Sentry's head sliding into his lap. Dale's office can't monitor every senior in the county. But what if we could? What if we trained volunteers to recognize the warning signs, make regular check-ins, flag problems before they become crises? You think people would volunteer for that? I think people like you would. People who've been through it and don't want others to suffer the same way. Rosa was quiet for a moment. "When do we start?" They started 3 days later. Rosa brought 6 other seniors who'd been targeted by various scams. Jordan provided legal framework and pro bono contracts. Dale coordinated with his office to make it official. Carla offered to train volunteers in recognizing cognitive decline versus normal aging. Marcus found himself at the center of something he hadn't planned, but couldn't walk away from. They called it Sentinel Watch, named for the dog who'd started it all by refusing to abandon people who needed her. The first meeting happened in the Riverside Community Center. 23 people in metal folding chairs, drinking coffee from styrofoam cups, and sharing stories of how they'd almost lost everything to predators who wore suits and smiled while stealing. Marcus stood at the front and realized he was making decisions again. Real ones. Decisions that would affect people's lives and safety. The weight of it pressed on his chest, familiar and frightening, but Sentry sat at his feet, and that made it bearable. "We can't stop every scam," Marcus said. "We can't save everyone. But we can make sure people aren't alone. We can make sure someone notices when things go wrong. We can be for each other what we wish someone had been for us." The program grew. Within a month, 40 volunteers. Within 2 months, they'd flagged 6 potential scams and connected 12 isolated seniors with resources. Rosa became the coordinator, her energy and fury channeled into protection instead of grief. Jordan opened her practice in March, renting a small office above the pharmacy, the same building where Preston had operated. She took Rosa's case pro bono, filed suit against Preston's dissolved company, and somehow recovered $4,000 from accounts he'd missed liquidating. It wasn't $12,000, but it was something. Victory measured in what you could salvage from wreckage. And Marcus kept his night shifts at the lumber mill. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The rhythm of it grounded him, reminded him that sometimes the most important work was the kind nobody celebrated. Measure, mark, cut. Simple, honest, enough. But 3 days a week, he also trained volunteers for Sentinel Watch, taught them how to recognize patterns, spot threats, trust instincts that said something was wrong even when everything looked right. He was using his SEAL training, after all. Just not the way the military had intended. Preston Vale was never criminally charged. He'd covered his tracks too well, dissolved his company too quickly, hidden assets too cleverly. Last Dale heard, he'd resurfaced in Florida running a similar operation under a new name. The system had failed to stop him permanently, but it had stopped him here. And that mattered to Thomas and Ellen Reeves, who still had their home and their pension and each other. That mattered to Rosa Chen, who'd gotten some of her money back and all of her power. That mattered to the seniors who joined Sentinel Watch and learned they didn't have to face winter alone. Sometimes, justice wasn't catching every predator. Sometimes, it was just making sure this one, in this place, couldn't hurt these people anymore. And sometimes, that was enough. 6 months changed everything and nothing. The Reeves house still sat on the same street, still wore the same faded paint. But inside, the temperature stayed at 68 degrees, without negotiation or fear. Elle had gained back the weight cold and stress had stolen, her face fuller, her movements less fragile. Thomas's cough had faded to occasional instead of constant, his doctors finally able to manage his condition now that he could afford both heat and medication. But the real change was harder to see and impossible to miss. They moved through their days differently now, like people who'd survived something that should have killed them and come out the other side with a story they needed to tell. Ellen started teaching again. Not in classrooms, but in Jordan's office, where she ran financial literacy workshops for seniors every Thursday afternoon. She taught them how to read contracts, recognize red flags, ask questions that mattered. Her voice had regained its school teacher authority, the kind that made people sit straighter and pay attention without realizing they were doing it. "Don't sign anything the same day it's presented," Ellen told a room of 12 seniors on a Thursday in late June. "Legitimate offers don't expire in 24 hours. Pressure is predation. Remember that." Thomas sat in the back of these sessions, nodding at points he'd learned too late and wanted others to learn sooner. He'd become Jordan's unofficial investigator, reviewing contracts from seniors who sensed something wrong but couldn't articulate what. His railroad workers' attention to detail, the same skill that had kept trains running on time for 40 years, now kept people from signing away their lives. Marcus watched them transform and felt something he hadn't expected. Pride, maybe, or just relief that the people he'd helped save were now saving others. The circle completing itself in a way that made the initial cost feel less like sacrifice and more like investment. He visited every Sunday, brought Sentry, shared dinner, listened to Ellen's stories about her students and Thomas's updates on cases they'd prevented. Sentry would spend the first 30 minutes reacquainting herself with every corner of the house, confirming nothing had changed in the week since her last inspection, then settle between Thomas and Ellen like she'd never left. "She still thinks this is home," Ellen said one evening, watching Sentry's careful patrol. "It is," Marcus said. "Dogs can have 2 homes. People, too, maybe." On the 4th Sunday in June, Thomas pulled Marcus aside while Ellen was in the kitchen. The old man's hands were steadier now, his color better, but his eyes held the seriousness of someone about to say something difficult. "I need to ask you something," Thomas said. "Anything." "Why did you really stop? That day at the market, you said it was because something felt wrong, but I've been thinking about it for months. You didn't stop because of Sentry. You stopped because of us." Marcus sat down slowly, the question hitting deeper than expected. He'd asked himself the same thing countless times, trying to understand the impulse that had made him turn around when every instinct said, "Keep walking, stay uninvolved, protect yourself from caring." "I stopped because I saw my future," Marcus said finally. 20 years from now, if I kept living the way I was living, alone, convinced I was protecting people by staying away from them. You and Ellen standing there, trying to do the right thing in a world that punished you for it. That was every decision I'd made since Syria, following rules that hurt the people they were supposed to protect. Thomas nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I'm learning that decisions only destroy you when you make them alone. When you let other people in, carry the weight together, the decisions don't feel like weapons anymore." "Is that what Carla teaches you?" Marcus smiled. Thomas was more observant than he let on. "Among other things." Carla Jensen had become a constant in Marcus's life through a series of small decisions that added up to something neither of them had planned. It started with professional courtesy. She'd evaluated Thomas, stayed involved with Sentinel Watch, offered to train volunteers in trauma recognition. But somewhere between the second planning meeting and the fourth Sunday dinner, professional had shifted to personal. She understood what he'd been through, because she'd spent 10 years helping veterans process it. She didn't try to fix him or convince him his guilt was unwarranted. She just sat with him in the truth of it. That good people could make right decisions that still ended in tragedy. That healing wasn't forgetting, but learning to carry the weight differently. Their first real date happened by accident. Marcus had been helping her move supplies to the community center for a Sentinel Watch training when his truck broke down 3 blocks from her apartment. She'd offered dinner while they waited for the tow truck. They'd talked until 2 a.m., not about trauma or therapy or anything clinical, just about life. About her late husband who died in Fallujah. About Marcus's mother who taught him that keeping things safe sometimes meant letting them go. About the strange mathematics of loss that somehow made room for new things if you were brave enough to let them in. "I'm not good at this," Marcus had admitted, standing at her door when the tow truck finally came. At what? Being with someone. Making decisions that affect more than just me. Carla had smiled, sad and knowing. "Nobody's good at it, Marcus. We're all just trying not to run away when it gets hard." He'd kissed her then, brief and uncertain, and she'd kissed him back with the patience of someone who understood that healing happened in small increments, not grand gestures. Now, 3 months later, they moved through each other's lives with the careful attention of people building something they both knew was fragile and worth protecting. She came to his lumber mill sometimes, at the end of his shift, brought coffee, sat with him in the truck while dawn broke over Riverside. He went to her therapy sessions at the VA, not as a patient, but as a volunteer, sharing his story with other veterans who were trying to figure out how to be human again after war. "You're getting better at decisions," she told him one morning in July, both of them watching the sun turn the river gold. "How can you tell?" "Because you stopped apologizing every time you make one. You used to preface everything with, 'I'm probably wrong, but—' Now you just say what you think and trust people to tell you if you're off." Marcus considered this. She was right. The constant second-guessing, the paralysis that came from fearing his judgment would kill someone again. It had eased. Not disappeared, but quieted enough that he could hear other things beneath it. Confidence, maybe. Or just acceptance that perfection wasn't possible, and people survived imperfection every day. Jordan's practice thrived in a way that surprised no one, except Jordan herself. She'd expected to struggle, expected Riverside to be too small or too poor to sustain a legal practice focused on seniors and veterans. Instead, she found herself turning away clients because she couldn't keep up with demand. Turned out, decades of predatory lending, exploitative contracts, and elder abuse had left a lot of people needing a lawyer who actually gave a damn. Jordan gave several damns, loudly and effectively. She won cases other lawyers wouldn't take, negotiated settlements that actually returned money to victims, and built a reputation that made certain types of businesses very nervous about operating in Riverside. She hired 2 paralegals by August and started mentoring law students from the university who wanted to learn how to practice law that mattered. Her Seattle firm had threatened to sue over her non-compete clause, then backed down when Jordan pointed out that elder law wasn't covered in their contract because they'd never considered it lucrative enough to protect. "They thought I was trading down," Jordan told Marcus over lunch one afternoon. "Going from corporate litigation to helping old people fight scams. They couldn't understand why anyone would choose that." "Do you understand it?" "Yeah, I'm useful here. In Seattle, I was profitable. Those aren't the same thing." Sentinel Watch expanded beyond what any of them had imagined. What started as 23 people in a community center became a network of 80 volunteers covering 3 counties. They conducted wellness checks, taught financial literacy, connected isolated seniors with resources, and flagged suspicious activity before it became crisis. Rosa Chen ran it with the fierce efficiency of someone who'd turned grief into purpose. She coordinated schedules, trained new volunteers, and maintained a database of every senior in their coverage area with medical needs, financial vulnerabilities, and emergency contacts. When someone missed a check-in, Rosa knew within hours and dispatched help immediately. "We're saving lives," Rosa told Marcus during a quarterly review meeting. 3 attempted suicides prevented because someone showed up when they were supposed to. 2 medical emergencies caught early enough to matter. 17 scams stopped before money changed hands. Those are just the ones we can measure. "And the ones we can't?" Marcus asked. Rosa smiled. "The ones we can't measure are even better. People who aren't alone anymore. People who know someone will notice if they disappear. That's worth more than any number." Dale's office made Sentinel Watch semi-official by summer, providing liability coverage and emergency response coordination. It wasn't perfect. They couldn't save everyone, couldn't prevent every tragedy. But they'd created something that made Riverside safer for the people everyone else forgot about. The Yellowstone River flooded in late August, mild by Montana standards, but enough to threaten low-lying homes. Sentinel Watch mobilized before the county emergency services, evacuating 12 seniors who couldn't drive themselves and wouldn't have left without help. Thomas and Ellen opened their home to 3 of them, turning their living room into temporary shelter. Sentry appointed herself guardian of all 3, rotating between them with focused attention that suggested she'd been bred for exactly this kind of protection. Marcus spent 2 days filling sandbags and helping evacuate livestock, his SEAL training finally useful for something that didn't involve violence. When the water receded and the damage was tallied, Riverside had lost property, but not people. The county emergency director credited Sentinel Watch with preventing what could have been a dozen fatalities. "You built something good," Dale told Marcus while they were cleaning mud out of a senior's basement. "Your mother would be proud." Marcus thought about the keepsake he'd sold, the small object his mother had left him that he'd traded for money to buy a dog. He still thought about it sometimes, wondered where it had ended up, whether whoever bought it understood what it had cost. But then he'd see Thomas and Ellen, healthy and safe, and teaching others how to survive. He'd see Rosa, transformed from victim to warrior. He'd see Jordan, finally practicing law the way she'd dreamed about in law school, before corporate recruiters convinced her bigger was better. He'd see Carla, patient and present, and teaching him that love didn't require perfection, just honesty. And he'd realize the keepsake had done exactly what his mother intended. It had kept him connected to who he was, even when he had to let it go to become who he needed to be. September brought the kind of clear, cold mornings that promised winter was coming but hadn't arrived yet. Marcus was at the farmer's market with Sentry, buying vegetables for a dinner he was cooking for Carla when he saw them. An elderly couple stood near the entrance holding a hand-painted sign that read, "Selling wedding rings, $300, need first month's rent." Marcus stopped walking. Sentry's ears came forward, her body shifting into that alert stance that said she'd noticed them too. The couple looked desperate and trying to hide it, the man's shoulders hunched against shame, the woman's eyes wet with tears she refused to let fall. Marcus felt the familiar pull, the instinct to intervene. But this time it didn't feel like burden or obligation. It felt like purpose. He pulled out his phone, called Jordan. "There's a couple at the market selling their wedding rings for rent money. Can you meet me here?" "Give me 10 minutes. He called Rosa next. I need an emergency assessment. Possible housing crisis, possible exploitation. On my way. Then he walked over to the couple. The man looked up, wary and hopeful in equal measure. You interested in the rings? No, Marcus said. I'm interested in why you need to sell them. The story spilled out in fragments. Rent had doubled when their building was sold to a new management company. Fixed income couldn't cover the increase. Landlords said they could pay or leave. No negotiation. They had 10 days to come up with first month's rent at the new rate, or they'd be evicted. How much is the increase? Marcus asked. $600, from $900 to $1,500. Marcus did the math. Montana had rent control laws for seniors on fixed income. A $600 increase in 1 month was illegal. But these people didn't know that, and the landlord was counting on their ignorance. Jordan arrived before Marcus finished taking notes. She introduced herself, asked to see their lease, and her face went hard when she read it. This is illegal, Jordan said flatly. Montana law caps annual rent increases at 5% for tenants over 65. Your landlord just violated state statute 7024-441. The woman grabbed her husband's arm. So we don't have to pay? You have to pay the legal increase, which is $45, not $600. And your landlord is going to pay penalties for attempting illegal eviction. Jordan pulled out her phone. I'm calling this in right now. You're staying in your apartment, and he's going to wish he'd read the law before he tried this. Rosa showed up with a folder of resources: emergency rent assistance, legal aid information, tenant rights documentation. She sat with the couple, explained everything slowly and clearly, made sure they understood they weren't stupid or helpless, just targeted. Marcus watched it happen and felt something click into place in his chest. This was the circle completing. He'd been saved by a dog he bought for $100. Thomas and Ellen had been saved by people who noticed. Now these people were being saved by the network that had grown from that first intervention. And somewhere in Florida, Preston Vale was probably running the same scam on different people. And Marcus couldn't stop that. But here, in Riverside, predators hit a wall made of people who'd learned to fight back. That night, Marcus cooked dinner for Carla at his house. Sentry supervised from her bed, head on her paws, eyes tracking their movements with benevolent attention. Carla helped him chop vegetables, their shoulders brushing in the small kitchen, comfortable silence broken by occasional questions about seasoning and cooking times. You seemed lighter today, Carla said. When you called about the couple? You weren't carrying it the same way. Carrying what? Responsibility. You used to wear it like a weight that might crush you. Today it looked like something you chose instead of something you were sentenced to. Marcus thought about Syria, about the child who died because he'd followed orders, about the years he'd spent convinced that making decisions was the same as causing harm, about the lumber mill where he'd hidden from his own judgment. I'm not lighter, he said. The weight's the same. I just learned how to carry it with help. After dinner, they sat on the couch, Carla's head on his shoulder, Sentry sprawled across both their feet like a living blanket. The news played quietly on the television, stories of disasters and conflicts and systems failing the people they were supposed to protect. Do you think we're making a difference? Marcus asked. Or are we just putting band-aids on a system that's designed to bleed people? Carla was quiet for a moment. Both, maybe. The system needs to change, but people need to survive while we're changing it. Sentinel Watch is how they survive. That matters. Even if we can't save everyone? Especially because we can't save everyone. If we could, it wouldn't be heroic. It would just be logistics. Marcus felt Sentry's weight across his feet, warm and solid and real. The dog who'd been too gentle for military work, too protective to be a proper attack dog, who'd washed out of the program because she prioritized people over protocol. The same dog who'd taught him that failure in one system could be success in another. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said. Carla lifted her head, looked at him.
Okay?
"The lumber mill. Everyone thinks I took that job because I was broken, because I couldn't handle anything more demanding. And maybe that was true at first. But I kept it because it's honest work that doesn't require me to pretend I'm more whole than I am. I cut lumber 3 nights a week because it reminds me I'm still useful, even when I'm not saving anyone."
I know,
Carla said. "You do?"
Marcus, I'm a therapist who specializes in combat trauma. You think I don't recognize healthy coping when I see it? She smiled. You didn't choose the lumber mill because you gave up. You chose it because you're one of the few people smart enough to know that rest isn't retreat. You built a life that let you heal instead of pretending you were already healed. That's brave.
Marcus kissed her then, deep and grateful and terrified and hopeful all at once. Sentry sighed heavily, adjusting her position to accommodate their movement without actually vacating her spot. 3 months later, winter returned to Riverside, with the same cold that had nearly killed Thomas and Ellen a year earlier. But this time, Sentinel Watch had already identified 43 seniors at risk for heating emergencies. Jordan had secured emergency assistance grants. Rosa had organized volunteers to install extra insulation. Dale's office had flagged 3 suspicious heating contractors charging illegal rates. The Reeves hosted Thanksgiving dinner, their house warm and full of people who'd become family through crisis. Marcus and Carla, Jordan and the paralegal she'd started dating, Rosa and her 2 daughters who'd driven from Billings, Dale and his wife who'd brought enough pie for an army. Thomas stood at the head of the table and raised his glass. "A year ago, Ellen and I were standing in the cold trying to sell our dog so we could survive winter. We thought we'd lost everything. Turned out we were just clearing space for what mattered." Ellen touched Sentry's head where the dog sat between their chairs. "This girl saved our lives by teaching someone else how to care. That's a miracle we'll never stop being grateful for." Marcus felt Carla's hand find his under the table, squeeze gently. Sentry looked up at him with those amber eyes that had first made him stop, first made him question his own isolation, first made him believe that engagement with the world didn't have to end in tragedy. After dinner, Marcus stepped outside for air. The night was clear and cold, stars sharp enough to cut. He heard the door open behind him, knew without looking it was Thomas. "You okay?" the old man asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" "About how a year ago I was convinced the best thing I could do for the world was stay away from it. And now—" Marcus gestured back toward the house where light spilled from windows and voices rose in laughter and argument and life. "Now you've got people who need you," Thomas finished. "Now I've got people who let me need them back." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, "I never thanked you properly. For everything." "You paid me $100 for your dog. We're square." "That's not what I mean. You didn't just save our lives. You gave us back our purpose. Ellen's teaching again. I'm helping Jordan. We matter to people. That's worth more than heat or money or anything we thought we'd lost." Marcus understood. Purpose wasn't something you found. It was something you built from the pieces of what broke you. He'd built his from guilt and lumber and a dog who'd needed a home. Thomas and Ellen had built theirs from near disaster and recovery, and the knowledge that surviving meant helping others survive too. "Sentry's the one who should get credit," Marcus said. "She's the one who refused to quit on you. She learned that from you." They stood in the cold together, two men who'd seen war in different decades and come home to find peace in unexpected places. After a while, Ellen called them back inside for pie, and they went. Because that's what family did. Spring came early the next year. By March, the snow had retreated, and Riverside looked like a town that might survive after all. Sentinel Watch had prevented 47 scams, assisted in 23 medical emergencies, and created a model that 3 other Montana counties were adopting. Jordan's practice had grown to 5 employees and a waiting list. Rosa had trained 60 new volunteers. Dale's office had prosecuted 2 major elder fraud cases, both resulting in actual prison time for perpetrators. And Marcus still worked night shift at the lumber mill 3 times a week, cutting wood with the same precision he'd once applied to military operations. But now it wasn't hiding, it was balance. On a Tuesday in April, Marcus got the call he'd been both expecting and dreading. Dale's voice was careful, controlled. Preston Vale was arrested in Tampa. Elder fraud, unlicensed financial services, 23 counts. He's looking at 15 years minimum. Marcus felt something settle in his chest. Not satisfaction exactly, just confirmation that patterns eventually caught up with people, that justice moved slowly, but sometimes it moved. Did any of his victims get their money back? Some, not all. Asset recovery's ongoing. Dale paused. Rosa's $12,000 is probably gone, but she's not defined by what she lost anymore. None of them are. That was true. Rosa had transformed loss into purpose. Thomas and Ellen had transformed desperation into advocacy. Jordan had transformed guilt into service. And Marcus had transformed isolation into connection. They'd all been broken in different ways, and the breaking hadn't been fixed, but they'd learned to build something new from the pieces. On Sunday, Marcus brought Sentry to visit Thomas and Ellen like always, but this time he brought Carla too. They sat in the warm living room drinking coffee, planning the next Sentinel Watch training, and laughing at something Ellen said about her most stubborn student. Sentry lay in the center of the room where she could see everyone, her tail thumping occasionally against the floor. She was 8 years old now, graying at the muzzle, moving a little slower than she used to. But her eyes were still sharp, still scanning, still watching for threats and confirming safety in the same patient rotation she'd perfected over years of practice. "She's happy," Ellen said, watching the dog. "She's got 2 homes and twice as many people to protect," Marcus said. "Of course she's happy." Thomas set down his coffee. "Can I ask you something, Marcus? That day at the market, if we hadn't been selling Sentry, if it had been anything else, would you still have stopped?" Marcus thought about it honestly. "I don't know. Maybe not. I'd spent 5 years training myself to walk past people who needed help because I was convinced I'd just make things worse." "What changed?" "She did." Marcus looked at Sentry. "I saw you trying to protect her even when you couldn't protect yourselves. And I saw her trying to protect you, even though you were selling her to save her. That kind of loyalty doesn't quit, doesn't calculate, doesn't measure cost against benefit. It just stays. And I realized I'd been measuring everything wrong. I thought staying away kept people safe. Really, it just kept me safe from caring when things went wrong." Carla's hand found his, fingers interlacing. "And now?" "Now I know things will go wrong whether I'm involved or not. The question isn't whether I can prevent all harm, it's whether I'm willing to help reduce it." Ellen's eyes were wet. "You reduced ours. You eliminated it." "We eliminated it," Marcus corrected. "All of us together. That's the point. Alone, we fail. Together, we survive." The sun set outside, turning the Yellowstone River gold and pink and purple. Inside, the heater hummed steadily, keeping the temperature exactly where it should be. Sentry stood, stretched, made her rounds of the room one more time, then settled back in the center with a sigh that sounded like contentment. Marcus watched her, and finally understood what his mother had been trying to teach him with that keepsake she'd left behind. "You keep things to remember who you are," she'd said. "Just don't keep them so tight, you forget to be human." He'd sold the keepsake to buy a dog who'd taught him how to be human again, how to care without controlling, how to help without requiring perfection, how to carry the weight of responsibility with other people instead of alone in the dark. The $100 he'd paid for Sentry had been the best investment of his life. Not because she was worth that much, she was worth more than he could measure, but because buying her had required him to make a decision that affected more than just himself, to choose engagement over safety, to believe that his judgment might not destroy everything it touched. 15 years as a Navy SEAL, and the most heroic thing he'd ever done was stop at a farmer's market and ask an old couple why they were selling their dog. Not because stopping was dramatic or dangerous or decorated, but because it was human. Because it said that other people's suffering mattered more than his own fear. Because it built a bridge between isolation and connection. And sometimes, bridges saved more lives than bullets ever could. That night, driving home with Carla beside him and Sentry in the back seat, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since before Syria. Peace. Not the absence of pain or guilt or memory, just the presence of purpose that made the pain bearable, the guilt useful, the memories instructive instead of destructive. "I love you," he said to Carla, the words surprising him but feeling right. She smiled. "I know. You have for a while. You just needed to trust yourself enough to say it." At home, Marcus let Sentry out one last time. The dog investigated the backyard with her usual thoroughness, then returned to his side, ready for whatever came next. They stood together under Montana stars, man and dog, both of them washouts from systems that valued aggression over protection, both of them finding purpose in the failure. Marcus thought about the title people would give this story if they knew it. The Navy SEAL who worked at a lumber mill, the shocking job that everyone wanted to fix or explain or pathologize. But the job wasn't the shock. The shock was that healing sometimes looked like retreat, that strength sometimes looked like limitation, that the most courageous thing a warrior could do was choose peace over perpetual combat. He'd learned to cut lumber instead of cutting himself off. He'd learned to make small decisions that mattered instead of avoiding decisions that might destroy. He'd learned that saving the people in front of you was enough, even when you couldn't save everyone. And he'd learned it all from a dog who'd been sold for $100 by people who loved her too much to let her starve. Miracles didn't arrive like thunder. They arrived like this: quiet, persistent, built from small choices that accumulated into changed lives. God didn't always answer prayers by removing pain. Sometimes he answered by giving you purpose for the pain, company in the pain, and proof that suffering didn't have to be wasted. Thomas and Ellen had survived. Rosa had transformed. Jordan had come home. And Marcus Wade, former Navy SEAL, current lumber mill worker, and permanent proof that broken things could still build, had finally learned the truth his mother had been trying to teach him all along. You didn't keep things to preserve them unchanged. You kept them to remember who you were while you became someone new. And sometimes, the most important thing you could keep was the willingness to stop when someone needed you, even when every instinct said, keep walking. Especially
when walking away felt safer. Because safety wasn't the same as living. And living required the courage to care about people who might break your heart, to make decisions that might go wrong, to believe that your presence mattered more than your perfection.
Marcus Wade had stopped at a farmer's market on a cold winter day and bought a dog for $100. That decision had saved 4 lives, built a network that protected hundreds more, and taught him that heroism wasn't about never failing. It was about staying present when failure happened, learning from it, and choosing to try again anyway. That was the miracle. That was the answer. That was enough.